and my mother used to drive a big truck with a gas producer as fuel, where she would take the apples to the market. My father was stationed in Albury, and they lived in tents, and the army experience was very important to him. He loved Australia, loved the ironic humour, loved the lack of reverence for authority, loved the pranks, loved the way Australians took off politicians and the way the press reported things. Became very bonded with his army mates and his tent mates, and they continued to meet right up until he died at 74, once a month. They continued to meet for lunch and a big booze up. The group of guys that met and the group in Albury, I think, were a pretty rich ethnic mix. There would have been a lot of Germans and Austrians, and a lot of enemy aliens that joined the Australian Army because they were violently anti-fascist, and that was their way of they weren't allowed to fight overseas. That was very difficult for a lot of them, who were dying to put on their adopted country's uniform and go off and fight. Some of the difficulties of migration involved adjusting to very different lifestyles, to less formality, to less variety in food, white bread only, one variety of cheese, different ways of doing things, and a very rich colloquial language that was very difficult for them to comprehend, even though some of the family had English before. It was very difficult to understand the accent, which was very drawly. I can remember them saying people didn't open their mouths enough so that the words ran into one another, which I guess is a common migrant experience. So it was different. It was interesting that they didn't express any homesickness. I guess that was because their closest family was with them. They did talk a lot about what life had been like, but with no sense of regret at having left. I think what characterises our family is a strong sense of Jewish identity, a strong sense of family, a linking to the past, a sense of where we come from. We tend to get together very often. I'm one of 3 sisters, and we get together every Friday night. We take it in turns at whose place it is for dinner with all the kids. Whilst we're not a very religious family in terms of observance, we certainly feel a strong sense of community.
Jewish people have brought to Australia a culture rich in tradition. Their impact is very obvious in several distinctly Jewish neighbourhoods in Sydney and in Melbourne.
I think the migrant experience is one of hard work, a belief that you come here most of the time with nothing and that you need to establish yourself, a sense of wanting to provide a good education for kids. I think that's a general migrant wish and orientation, and I think a sense that by education you're bettering yourself somehow, or maybe it's something to do with education is transportable, skills are transportable if you have to pack your bags and move countries. My father, coming from a socialist orientation, joined the Labor Party very early on, was very active in the anti-Vietnam moratorium, marched in the moratorium march. My mother and father both had a very strong sense of wanting to give something back to a country that had welcomed them. My father did it by becoming involved in more organisational affairs, and my mother became very involved in community affairs. She did Meals on Wheels for years. She was a CAB volunteer, and she was a court networker, and she continued to do that until, a couple of days before she died, actually. She was still very active in that. They both were long-term donors of the blood bank. They were very community-minded, and a very strong sense of gratitude for a country that had given them a home, and that they felt was a fantastic place to bring up kids.
Many of the Jewish refugees who migrated to Australia were highly educated people who made immense contributions to the artistic life of Australia. Famous among Jewish migrants are Sir John Monash, who led Australian troops in World War I, and Sir Isaac Isaacs, the first Australian-born Governor-General. 25,000 Holocaust survivors, mostly from Poland and Hungary, arrived in Australia between 1946 and 1957. In more recent times, the Jewish Welfare Society assisted Russian refugees to settle in Australia. Jewish migrants, like most migrants to Australia, have been resourceful and motivated to succeed in their new country. They arrived here, many after being persecuted, looking for a better life for themselves and their families. Like Carol Klooger's parents and grandparents, they've been hard-working and law-abiding, with a strong sense of commitment to their family and a love of Australia.